Hi, my name is Steve Miller, and I'm the Vice President of ALM Solutions at SmartBear Software. I have a little over 26 years of experience with software development and testing, and today we're going to talk about some thorny issues of software development and quality assurance, and we're really going to focus in on improving your ability to estimate tasks. Now, how can we do that? How can we actually improve our estimating skills? Well, first of all, you need to have the right person performing the estimates. Secondly, you need to decompose your requirements down into lower level tasks. You need to manage scope creep. Finally, you need to recognize that some people have a very difficult time estimating tasks, and they can learn to do that over time. Now, for those of you that you've been using Agile for a while, you're probably familiar with the chicken and the pig parable. And that is, let's imagine that a chicken and a pig got together one morning. They said, hey, let's make breakfast. In fact, let's have eggs and bacon. Well, if you look at that, the chicken isn't very committed because the chicken can produce eggs every single day of their life. The pig, however, to make bacon, they actually have a much larger level of commitment. They have to actually eliminate themselves to be able to do that. So the idea here is that anytime you're doing software development, you normally have chickens and pigs are normally the people that are doing the work. So this will be the developers, the project managers, the scrum masters, the testers. They have a high level of commitment to getting the job done. On the other hand, you also have chickens, and chickens can be maybe your marketing team or your sales team or maybe your management team that's forcing your team into maybe extending the scope of your release or cutting back on things that are absolutely mandatory or micromanaging the process. So it's important to know that pigs are committed, chickens aren't. So how do we take this information and learn how to improve our task estimations? Well, first of all, anytime you're doing software development, ensure that the right person is doing the estimates. Many times, project managers and scrum masters will jump in and try and do those estimates for programming and testing tasks, and they're not the right people to do it. Instead, if it's a programming task, have your programmers do the estimates because they're going to be really familiar with what tasks need to happen to get those programming items done. Likewise, if you're a tester, ensure that the testers estimate all of their testing tasks. Finally, make sure that only pigs estimate their areas of work. Another way that you can improve your task estimates is to better define your requirements. Now, if you're using very light requirements like user stories, you'll need to decompose those down into individual tasks. But let's take a couple of examples. Let's imagine that you were creating a CRM system, a customer relationship management system. You could create a requirement that looks similar to this, a user story that says, as a sales rep, allow adding a new customer to my CRM and saving the record by pressing submit. Now, if you provide that level of detail to a programmer, they will probably come back with an estimate something like this. They'll say, well, I know I need to do some user interface design. I'll give that 4 hours. I need to create some database logic. I'll give that another 4. And I have to do some business logic, so I'll give that another 2. Okay, so you're ending up with about a 10-hour estimate. Now, at first blush, that you may look at this and say, well, that's a pretty good way to estimate this thing. But what we're really not seeing here is that there's really not enough detail in that user story to come up with a good estimate. So let's take a different example with that in a better way of doing it. So let's imagine that we were a little bit more detailed in our user story. So what if we said, as a sales rep, we're going to allow adding a new customer to my CRM with these attributes, and then list out the attributes that you're going to collect. Because what will happen is if you don't specify that, you'll be doing a lot of rework because somebody will come back and say, well, do we want the phone number there, and you know, do we need both the city, state, and the zip for the address, that kind of thing. Secondly, it says ensure that the company and the email are always required entry. Email should be unique and should contain an ampersand and a period to be valid. So again, we're placing in some validation information here so that the developer knows exactly what type of programming they need to do. Finally, we talk about auditing. We say upon add, capture it in an audit. And let's look at who added the contact and the date and the time that it was added. So it's telling you specifically what type of information needs to be audited there. Now, if you give this to a developer, they're going to come back with a very different estimate and probably a more concise and accurate estimate, because they're going to talk about, they're going to go, wow, I know I need to create a database table here for customers and audits. We have a couple hours there. We need to create some stored procedures, some user interface for all those fields they mentioned. I need to add some logic to add the contact and add the auditing process. And I also need to validate things like required fields and the email validations that we talked about earlier. So by getting to that level of decomposition, notice that the estimate went from 10 hours to 16 hours, and most likely that's going to be a much better estimate than you had originally planned for. All right, now let's talk about another thing that comes up during software development, and that is changes in scope. Now, it's important to note that with Agile, you can change your mind as many times as you want, and build software along those lines, and that's absolutely okay. In fact, it's even okay in waterfall. All right, but what you need to do is you need to have defined the basics of what needs to happen up front, and if you do have changes, you need to go through and figure out whether that re-estimation is going to change your timeline. And if it still fits within your existing schedule, then all is good. Just continue going. If the estimation does not fit, a strategy that you can use is, rather than trying to do everything in the scope there, is reduce that scope down to the critical things and then create another requirement for the next phase that will layer on some additional complexity. So it still allows you to kind of change what you're doing, but it just reduces that scope down, and it allows you to ensure that you get done on time. The final thing I want to talk about is that some people are just not very good at estimating, and if I look at myself, I know that I always underestimate. I think that I should be getting done a lot faster than expected. I know some people that sandbag and they overestimate. Now, there's a very good way to control this, all right? And that is, once you're done with a release, do a retrospective. And a retrospective is simply going through and talking about the things you did well, the things that you need to improve on, and creating a set of action items for the next release or the next sprint. Another thing that you can do there is analyze variances. In other words, if you estimated something at 10 hours and it actually took you 12 hours to do it, then you've got a variance there. So you can figure out the percentage of variance. Now, what you can do when you figure that out is don't chastise the people that actually did the variance. That's not very productive. In fact, what you really should do is you should explain to them that their variance, let's say, was 20% on this particular project. Take that information and now buffer their next estimates by that amount. So if they have, let's say that their last variance was 20%, and this time they come in with an estimate of 100 hours for a particular item, ask them to buffer that by 20%, making it 120 hours. And what that does is it will then bring those estimates in line over time, and it also teaches them to think through about the buffering idea, and it self-corrects their estimates in the future. Well, I hope you enjoyed this thorny issue of software development and QA, and hopefully this will help you improve your task estimations. Keep an eye on YouTube and the SmartBear site, because we're going to be adding additional thorny issue videos in the coming months. Thank you.